What does classic Battletech look like when played at a highly competitive tournament level? Today we're going to answer that question by breaking down the top 3 lists at a recent global tournament and go over the tactics they used to find success. If you watch to the end, I'll give you a list of 7 key findings you can use in your own Battletech games. The tournament was set around the clan invasion, with 7,500 battle value aside, mechs only, and no duplicate mechs allowed. It was played over Discord and open to anyone in the world. This means once isolated local metas had to test themselves on a global stage. Because this was a tournament, fluff was pretty much thrown out the window, but even if you're a more narrative focused player, I still think you can get something out of this video. It allows us to take a look at the mechs and archetypes that are effective, and then tone them down to fit in our more story focused games. With that being said, Commander, let's jump into the top 3 lists and see what made each list better than the last. Placing third in the tournament was Jesty. The anchor of Jesty's team was the Stone Rhino, a 100-ton range mech with excellent defense. It has an easy setup and shoot style. It fires off 4 or 5 piercing attacks a turn. This is similar to the Secession Wars Awesome, but with more attacks and better range. Like the Awesome, this mech is an all-energy build, which means it has a 0% chance of ammunition explosion. While the Stone Rhino was an impressive mech, Jesty felt the MVP of his team was his Sun Bear, a relatively fast mech armed with an Ultra AC-20. It's a weapon that can be shot twice for a whopping 20 damage each at the small chance of jamming. Jesty mentioned that during the tournament, he teamed this mech up with his Stone Rhino, using the Sun Bear to screen for the slower, cannon-like mech. The screen tactic was simple but effective. If the enemy mech wanted to attack the Stone Rhino, it would have to get past the Sun Bear first. If the mech was big and slow, then the Sun Bear could flank it and attack it from a side or rear. If instead the mech was light and fast, then it was often too lightly gunned to be a credible threat to the super tanky Stone Rhino, and so the Sun Bear could focus on bigger threats. The other 2 mechs on Jesty's team were fast movers with short-range weaponry. The first was the Viper, with excellent speed and numerous small weapons. The other mech was the Firemoth H, which Jesty felt was one of the best designs available during the tournament. The mech can fire 9 lasers that do 6 damage each, and has the ability to move 15 to 20 hexes. That let him place it pretty much wherever he wanted on the board. Jesty mentioned he thought of his lance in 2 parts. The first part were the Behemoth and Sun Bear, who fought as a team, one shooting while the other screened. The second were the 2 light flankers. Depending on which group his opponent tried to attack first, Jesty would counter. If his opponent tried to deal with the 2 fast flankers, they would be pounded by the Stone Rhino and the Sun Bear. If instead they tried to crack open the tankier mechs, then the fast flankers could easily get into rear armor. Now, seeing how Jesty organized his lance into a team was pretty useful. But I think what's even more interesting is comparing the 3rd place list to the 2nd place list, and by doing so, we start to see a meta emerging. The 2nd place winner Snow used a similar composition, but with 2 key differences. Like Jesty, Snow split up his team into a fire group and a maneuver group. The first key difference in Snow's list, however, was that he used 2 long-range mechs who could stand and shoot instead of Jesty's 1. Snow used the Warhawk C and Rifleman 2C. Like Jesty's Behemoth, Snow's Warhawk C and Rifleman 2C had high armor, good range, and did not use ammunition. It should be noted that unlike Inner Sphere PPCs, the clan ER PPCs on the Warhawk do not have a minimum range. This gives it a slightly better brawl when compared to Inner Sphere mechs. And unlike the flimsy Inner Sphere version of the Rifleman, the clan Rifleman 2C has excellent armor and piercing, allowing it to play more on the front lines. Snow mentioned he used these 2 mechs in a gunline style, setting them up on hills and usually activating them early in the initiative, relying on their high defense to absorb punishment. This left later activations for his maneuver group to get better positioning. The weapon Snow's 2 flanker mechs carried was the second key difference. Unlike Jesty, Snow chose to equip his flanker mechs with pulse lasers. Pulse lasers are weapons with better accuracy but shorter range, but because Snow put them on his fast movers who could easily maneuver into point-blank range, most of the drawback of these weapons was negated. This allowed Snow's flanker mechs to hit much more often. When explaining how he used his lance, Snow stressed that while the maneuver element of his lance positioned near the center of the board, they were often used conservatively. He only attacked if there was little to no possibility of retaliation, always ensuring that when he moved, it was impossible for his light mechs to get shot, or that they had a total defense bonus of 4 or higher. Now, I didn't see Snow's games to confirm, but I would imagine that by keeping his light mechs alive as a constant flanking threat would have forced his opponent to slow down and limited their moves. This would buy time for his 2 range units to do damage and help keep enemy battle line mechs outside of brawl range. Now, while the second and third place lances had similarities in composition, The first place winner Memo used a completely different mech lineup that's both confusing and exciting to me. Unlike the other two competitors, Memo's first place list did not use dedicated range mechs, but more brawl-focused range battle line hybrids. His first mech, the Cerberus, has 2 range weapons, but also 6 medium pulse lasers. This means that while the Cerberus can stay at long range, it's inefficient for it to do so. It wants to close to 6 hexes or less to get its pulse weapons into play. The same is true for his second mech, the Longbow. It has 2 LRMs, but is completely fine with getting into brawl range with its lasers. Now, while Memo didn't really think much of his third mech, after comparing the 3 lists against each other, I think it was one of the major factors that allowed Memo to outperform the 2 other lists. For his third mech, Memo chose the Galloglass, an all-energy heavy mech with jump jets, similar to the Grasshopper. We can see how this third mech helps Memo by taking a deeper look at how the initiative phase plays out. All the top lists we've looked at have at least one mech with high defense who can activate early in the initiative and trade damage. Both Memo and Snow have a second mech who can do this, with Jesse's Sunbear able to do this to a limited extent. But when it comes to the third activation, Snow and Jesty are down to their lightly armored mechs that need to get where they can hit an enemy's rear and not get shot back, or else have to hide and do relatively nothing for the round. Memo's Galloglass, on the other hand, is a blend of tanky and semi-maneuverable, and so has better options. It can, like the Scout mechs, use its jump jets to get a flank if the opportunity presents itself, but it's also tanky enough to stand and trade. This would allow Memo to reliably get a third mech into the fight, where Jesty and Snow may find themselves needing to burn their third mech's turn or put it in a risky spot. Now, while this interpretation is a bit speculative, what's undeniable is that Memo out-armored his peers. Memo mentioned that he intentionally focused on getting lots of armor for a low cost, and by doing so, had a total combined armor and structure 30% higher than his opponents. By focusing on taking mechs that were overall bigger than his opponents, Memo was able to make his fourth mech not a light, but a light hunter, the Wraith TR1, a mech with excellent maneuverability to catch lights and pulse lasers to make it easier to hit them. On top of this, Memo upgraded both his Wraith and Galloglass to a pilot skill of 3, making it much easier to land a kick, which would force the enemy to make a pilot check to keep its feet, and often shatter a light mech's leg in a single blow. Now that we've looked at each list, here are the key takeaways I think would most benefit your games of Battletech. 1. Design lances as teams, not a collection of individuals. While you can just take 4 random mechs and throw them together, all 3 finalists considered how their mechs would fight as a unit. At a bare minimum, all these lists had a tanky fire element that trades shots and does damage, a fast maneuver element, and some way to defend against flankers. We'll be covering lance building more in depth in our How to Build a Lance video coming soon. 2. Favor mechs that mitigate explosions. 75% of the mechs the finalists use were energy mechs, or else had case. 3. Consider pulse lasers when they become available. The top 2 lists heavily featured pulse lasers to counter the speed of their opponents. 4. Mount multiple weapons. Finalists were ditching the risky SRMs for multiple laser weapons. Being able to make multiple rolls made their attacks more reliable, rather than a single all-or-nothing dice roll swinging the match. 5. Use both piercing and critical hit weapons. A good rule of thumb may be to bring 1 piercing weapon per 1,000 battle value, but I still need to do more research. 6. Tonnage. Favoring designs that had more armor and weight may have been a key factor in the finalist lists. 7. Keep in mind this can all change. As the Battletech hobby is seeing a resurgence, so too is there a resurgence of tournament Battletech, and lots of new strategies will be tested and discovered. Considering the wide range of lists during this tournament, I have a feeling this game is far from being solved. I'll keep my finger on the pulse of this for us, Commander, so we can see how this early global meta evolves. Till then, thanks for watching Nerdy Overanalyzed.
Yeah, we ran out of patience for your love with